welcome back to the Fox Robbins Business Show. Great to have you back. We've got a super guest tonight you're really going to enjoy. I am the host of the show, Bill Fox, and the co-host is none other than Cliff Robbins.
Bill.
And you have to watch out. I mean, he's my coach, so I call him Coach Robbins, but it's the same guy.
Do I make the decisions like Belichick did last night?
No, don't do a Belichick decision if you can help it. Tear our hearts out.
I like it.
You look great tonight. You look, what should I say, distinguished tonight.
Distinguished or extinguished?
Extinguished.
I prefer to be distinguished instead of extinguished. But thank you. Thank you. You do too.
Well, we're
very professional. We're dressing on the show like we dress during the day now.
We're ready for,
business.
For business. Anyway, we have as I said, we have a super guest tonight, which we're very proud to have on our show. It'll be Paul Pronovost, who is the editor of the Cape Cod Times.
Cool.
And now this is someone that you see every day in print, on the web, or you see the fruits of his work. So you're going to want to hear from Paul and what he has to say, because the Cape Cod Times, I mean, depending on how you look at it, they contribute to the economy.
Yeah,
greatly.
Hugely.
Greatly.
Yeah. Right.
And report on the economy.
Right.
Observers of.
Right.
And they do, as it so happens, speaking of our show, the Fox Robbins Business Show, the Cape Cod Times makes kind of a specialty of reporting on new and existing businesses.
Right.
I mean, they do quite a job with that.
They do.
And to their credit, as far as I'm concerned, as well as working on the survival of their own business.
We're going to talk about that. And
we're going to talk about that with Paul. Anyway, we want to get on with the heart of our show, but at first we want to go to our regular feature. Every episode of Fox Robbins Business Show is Cliff's Notes, because we take advantage of the fact that Cliff travels widely, meets a lot of people, has his finger on the pulse of business in New England in general, Massachusetts, and locally here specifically. And so we ask him what he's seen, what he's heard, what's going on. And Coach, what do you got for us tonight?
Well, tonight, in line with what we're going to be talking about with Paul Pronovost of the Cape Cod Times, I just want to talk a little bit about the one single constant in the business world, and that's the constant we call change. Yeah, it sounds like a dichotomy, but the fact is, change is constant. And if you haven't noticed, in the past few years, your business has had to change just to survive. Your business has had to make changes so that you can move forward and be positioned so when this economy, as I've been talking about, turns around, you'll be in a position to go forward and be very, very successful. If you do the same thing you've always done, you're going to get the same thing you always get isn't always really true. If you're doing something and you don't like what's happening, then you got to do something differently to make sure that your business is going to go in the right direction. I often talk about the fact that Motorola doesn't make car radios anymore. Motorola, they don't make car radios. They had to change. They had to figure out something else to make to survive, and made radical changes over the past 75 or 80 years of their lifetime. 3M, you ever hear of 3M?
3M.
Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. A lot of people don't even know what the name stands for anymore, but they don't dig holes in the ground anymore. They've made a lot of changes to their business model. IBM, people don't realize, if you read the book about IBM and the history of IBM, was huge in punch card business, and they didn't really believe in the magnetics and didn't understand it until the company decided to make a commitment to computers and magnetics and enter the digital age.
That's another one, Coach. Who knows that stands for International Business Machines? Does anybody know or care?
That's another thing. Do they really understand what that stands for? Yeah. Bill Gates, even the king of the computer age, almost missed the internet, the coming of the internet. And he said that, and he actually had to make a radical change to the Microsoft business model, come out with Explorer, which of course got him in trouble. That's a whole new story. The one thing I want you to understand about change, two things. Make that two things. I'm changing the count. Number one, it's necessary. Number two, it's painful. It's hard for people to change. People get stuck in ruts and they get used to doing the same thing the same old way. and it's certainly something that's going to cause some problems for you in your business almost any time, but particularly in times like these. I've been talking about the fact that the tide is out. You know, that metaphor that I've spoken about on the show before, that a rising tide floats all the boats, and while the economy was good, everybody's out there sailing and everybody's doing just fine. Well, as I've said so many times, the tide is out, the rocks are showing, there are shallows everywhere, but if you know how to sail, if you know how to change the sails and change the boat's direction and adjust to the wind, when the tide comes back in, you'll be just fine. So the one constant in the business environment is change. Get used to it, prepare for it. As a matter of fact, we're talking about this thing that's going to turn this economy around, and you and I have said it many times, Mr. Bill, it's not going to be the big businesses that turn this economy around. It's going to be the small businesses, and most especially, it's always been the small business with the great idea, what we call a disruptive, innovative idea, that is going to create jobs, and as we've been saying, create jobs in southeastern Massachusetts and turn this economy around, and hopefully we'll be an epicenter for it.
Right. Anyway, thanks, Coach. And we're going to welcome Paul Pronovost. He has a whole lot to say about it, but we'll try to keep it short. He's an interesting person and very accessible. You need to make it a point to meet him and talk with him when you have a chance. He's been the editor of the Cape Cod Times since November 2005, but he came to the paper in 2000 and worked in leadership positions until he became editor. He's the guy who has restructured the newsroom in such a way as to expand web delivery, keeping with the change
right.
in technology, web delivery of local news and information. He also has launched a community outreach effort and created the position of ombudsman. That is, listen to the audience, right?
Wow, what a novel idea.
How many businesses ought to be doing that?
All of them.
And various media partnerships. And so he's a key guy. And the mission of the Cape Cod Media Group is to deliver intelligence every day that is vital to the lives of the people on the Cape and Islands. That's what they're seeking to do. There is the paper, and there's Cape Cod Online, Cape Cod View, which is a glossy lifestyle magazine, Prime Time, Cape Cod, and so forth. So there's a lot going on. Paul is responsible for all content and presentation of information for the Cape Cod Media Group as such. And he worked in several community newspapers in the greater Boston area. He's the past president of the Massachusetts Press Association and the state Sunshine Chairman and the Society of Professional Journalists. He has a master's in public administration, Suffolk University, and a Bachelor of Arts from St. Anselm College. He's on the board of advisors of the Salvation Army, so he spreads his time around. Cape Cod Chapter, and former board of director of the Community Leadership Institute at Cape Cod, and he was a 2009 Pulitzer Prize juror.
Cool.
So he gives of himself, I would say.
I would say so.
And he's also, on a personal note, he's the reason for the Fox Robbins Business Show, because he's the very first person I went to for advice.
Ah.
Now, and what
even I didn't know that.
Well, all he had to do was this. That's all he had to do was that.
Yeah.
And so much for that idea. But
that's what I call leadership.
I said no. Well, I said we ought to be using the public medium, to discuss business and growth of interesting and long-term, higher-paying jobs. For young
our
people,
mission.
Like he said, great, go for it. So he's an important guy to me, and we'd like to welcome him on the show. Now, you guys, hold on one second. We're going to bring Paul on, and there's no fare heading for the fridge. Don't break for the fridge, and don't grab the channel changer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Fox Robbins Business Show. Thanks for not running to the fridge. And our guest, Paul Pronovost. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Bill, for having me.
Paul, how are you?
Cliff.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So Bill mentioned that you were an inspiration, a prime inspiration for him to put this show together and have me and So basically, I'm blaming you for the fact that I can't go out in public now, and or am I thanking you for the fact that the women are attacking me when I go in public?
Well, it all depends on what you're into, but I think you should be thanking me.
Thank you, Paul.
Although it's
Thank you
definitely
so much.
Bill's idea.
Thank you, Bill. Too.
And I love the notion of two foxes on the show now.
There you go. Tell us a little bit about Paul and the Cape Cod Times, a little bit about its history, and go ahead.
Well, you know, what's fascinating about the Cape Cod Times is that, and all media business really, is that for generations things haven't changed. And I thought your introduction was great because change now suddenly, just in the past few years, is happening at a rapid pace, and you see the evidence now of the businesses that can keep pace and the businesses that simply can't. And the ones that can are getting left behind, and you're seeing them go out of business or fall behind the pack and soon will go out of business. But the ones who can evolve and adapt, they're the ones who are doing very well. And so I love it. I love this time in our business. It's a change for the media and an evolution, really. But for those of us who like to work in that sort of environment and thrive on the notion of creating something, it's pretty cool.
It's all downright Darwinian, huh?
In many ways.
Well, isn't it fair and reasonable to say that you've that part of you has been a change agent, so-called change agent for the Cape Cod Times, and trying to introduce things with doubters looking at you and scratching their head? I mean, isn't that fair to say?
I think with all business, you can't be afraid of the change, and certainly, probably it's why I was brought in to become the editor, because I had some ideas of how we would change the structure of the newsroom. When I spoke to our publisher, one of the things I talked about was blowing up the newsroom, and at the time it sounded very radical because we had done the production of a newspaper the same way year in and year out for decades. And what I needed to get us to do is to stop making a newspaper and start making news and deliver it in all its many formats. And we were a little, not ahead of the curve, but we were certainly on the curve for changing how you deliver news. And now what we are doing, and all our business, is trying to determine a revenue model that can sustain this new world.
Now you have to be successful now within a group, because the Cape Cod Times became part of the Ottaway Group, and then that became part of Dow Jones, and then Dow Jones is now part of News Corp, which is an international, in scope.
That's right, and for many years, the Cape Cod Times was actually the Cape Cod Standard Times, and since the 30s, we were an edition of the Cape Cod Standard Times. When we hit 1970, we broke off and became our own newspaper, and then we changed our name in, I believe it was 1975, from Cape Cod Standard Times to simply Cape Cod Times, and the idea was to say, look, we're standing on our own 2 feet, and we're doing our own thing. We're still sister papers with our friends in New Bedford, and we're group owned by Ottaway Newspapers. That was Jimmy Ottaway owned a small group of daily newspapers across the country, and then Jimmy sold to Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal in the mid-'70s. And just recently, as you mentioned, Bill, Dow Jones has been acquired by News Corp. And News Corp, of course, is headed by Rupert Murdoch. He was very interested in the Wall Street Journal, maybe not so interested in the Ottaway papers, but I think we've ended up being a nice little gem for him, because we've been profitable, we're steady, and to the extent that we can be innovative and seek to be innovative, we're pretty good. And I think he's kept us, he hasn't sold us, and I think you're seeing an evolution now in our business, and we feel very comfortable with him because Rupert Murdoch is flush. He's unlike a lot of media companies that are debt-ridden. We are not, and that allows us to take some chances and to not worry about the consequences. This time is one of innovation, and so therefore we need to take some risks and be prepared to not always succeed.
Right.
What we talk a lot on this show, or have talked. About the need for a business plan, to think through the business, the mission, the objectives, strategies, and all that good stuff, or whatever. Is there such a thing as a business plan for the Cape Cod Media Group and the Cape Cod Times.
There is, but I'll be honest, the business plan is evolving very quickly these days. We have always prided ourselves on a strong theme, an objective, a 5-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 1-year plan. But now we're measuring success and setting goals in increments of months because things are changing so quickly. Technology is evolving so quickly that what we do is changing very, very rapidly. So and we need to be on a speeding bus, and that's okay. If you're not comfortable with that, then you're going to have to get off the bus. But if you are comfortable with that, it's a great place to be at the right time.
For years, the Japanese taught this incremental change, incremental improvement they call Kaizen. Now everybody's talking about the bullet train.
Right.
And that's really what we're on now, because things do change and so quickly, and you've got to either keep up or even, as you say, stay ahead of the curve, or you're going in the wrong direction, and that's not a good thing.
It's not. What we have going for us here on Cape Cod is we have a market that is still very interested in the traditional media, so-called. The Cape Cod Times.
The paper, the piece of paper.
Hard piece of
that's
paper.
Right.
And that's not going away,
No.
and neither is any of the associated revenue models.
Right.
Circulation is still important. Advertising is still important. Readership is still very important.
Right.
But subtly, that audience is changing. And the younger people, they're not reading the paper in the same numbers, and we know we have to reach them in a different way.
Right.
By delivering not only through the internet, but through handheld devices, through different mediums that we never thought of before, video, audio, and that's really opened up the door for us to make some pretty exciting changes. As I said, now the key is to make money. And,
that's always the final result.
But you know, you talking as I watch analysis and commentary on the television, I hear talk about whether papers literally are going to survive or not, and so forth. And what was the one wasn't the paper out in Oregon that just stopped publishing altogether?
In Denver.
Was it
the Rocky Mountain News.
Yeah.
The Detroit Free Press has dropped its distribution, its daily to your home distribution to 3 days instead of 7 days, and those are some of the radical steps that some media organizations are taking.
But you're not talking like the captain of the Titanic. I mean, you're talking about that you're actually going to make it to New York City.
We're feeling pretty confident about where we are for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is we have a franchise of local information, community information, and we share that.
Right.
We share that with the other media here on Cape Cod, the weeklies, the radio stations, to an extent television, and that is a shared franchise. But the Cape Cod Times, fortunately for us, is one of the big dogs, and so we have a proprietary information to an extent. Not in the same way the Wall Street Journal does. They have proprietary business information, but we have proprietary community information. And that means we're doing something that a lot of people cannot do or will not do. They can't replicate our business model, as opposed to some of the big metro operations, such as the case in Denver or Detroit, where what they do, what they deliver, can be given to you in a lot of different ways, a lot cheaper. Because remember, the business model of newspapers for generations was create a newspaper every single day. Take that information and print it. Hard steel presses, paper product. Take it then and put it in trucks and get it to your home.
Right.
That is a very labor-intensive daily process, a very costly process, and in addition to supplies, the manpower associated with that was extraordinarily high cost. Along comes the internet, our disruptive technology and innovation, and now suddenly you don't need the paper necessarily. Now you have an audience of people who want to get it in a different format, and that changed the ball game for everyone. So for the Detroits of the world and the Rocky Mountain Newses of the world that were on the bubble to begin with, it tipped the scales, where there were cheaper options, more people moving to those cheaper options, and they suffered the consequences.
You have of course, part of the demographic in this area. You have a lot of older people. I'm not part of that group.
None of us at this table are.
I certainly
let's
am
be
not.
clear.
But you have people who are. I'm just raising an issue that you do have a group that's used to having, like my wife and I, we like to see your paper
Right.
at the bottom of our driveway
At the
every
breakfast
morning.
table, or
Right.
yeah.
I'm sorry, you know.
And I think that's the good news for the Cape Cod Media Group. And let me use that term for a minute. For a long time, we were the Cape Cod Times, and we were the Cape Cod Times as a group. We evolved in recent times to become the Cape Cod Media Group,
Right.
because we realized we were more than the newspaper.
Right.
We were specialty products, as you introduced. We were the web, and the newspaper was a part of a family. That's why we became the Cape Cod Media Group. But still, the father of the family, the breadwinner of the family, is the Cape Cod Times.
Right.
And that's not going to change on Cape Cod, or frankly, in most markets for a very long time. People love the newspaper. It's part of their routine. There is a certain serendipitous quality to opening up the newspaper. And while times are tough in the newspaper business, they're not as dramatic, I think, as a lot of people suspect. What's happened to us is a collision of events, a major transition to what we do. We're going through this radical transformation. At the same time, the economy is in the toilet.
Right.
So how much of what is affecting our
Perfect
business?
storm going
Perfect
on here.
storm for
Digital
us.
and the economy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So is it the economy or is it the digital revolution? We're going to find out when the economy turns around. We're trying to be in the right place when it does.
And one thing I haven't mentioned, has been on my mind is cost, the nasty cost of doing business. And I've wondered, not being a newspaper person, but I've wondered, for instance, hearing all the goings on with the Boston Globe. And I was wondering whether one thing behind it isn't talked a lot about, Paul, but I think that it struck me that they weren't controlling their cost in some way. They had a big cost structure at that paper, and I could be dead wrong, but that's was just a member of the public, it struck me that might be true.
I think they did, and it's for a lot of the reasons that we just discussed. A newspaper is a costly enterprise. The number of people involved, the amount of equipment involved, the product and materials, and then the delivery means that it's going to be a costly operation. So whenever you have revenue challenges, and in the case of the Globe and other major papers, circulation challenges, you're going to get into big trouble very quickly, and you're going to have to reduce that cost. The problem with newspapers such as the Globe and most papers of the major metro size is they're a lot like broadcast television. They're trying to blast a general amount of information to as large an audience as possible. They're not a niche. They're not, say, Sports Illustrated or a business publication, which is crafting a specific audience.
Right.
They are trying to grab as large a share as possible, which means, and this is the case for all newspapers, that you stretch from hard news to features, to sports, to business, to crossword puzzles, to classified ads.
Across the entire gamut.
Across the gamut. And that means that it's hard to truly control your costs.
Right.
You can make paper cuts, but can you make deep cuts? Well, sometimes not without taking out huge chunks of something which is going to lead to almost a cyclical effect of loss of readership. If you remove, for example, the sports section of a newspaper, and you would reduce your costs significantly, you'd also reduce your audience significantly, and that, of course, is the major conundrum.
But that's why you've talked about, by contrast, that you have what you feel is a territory that you can defend with the Cape Cod Times.
Or you're talking about you have a niche.
A niche,
You have a
or-
different demographic than a major metropolitan city like the city of Boston that really is trying to be all things to all people, and as I've said 1,000 times, that's really very, very difficult to do. You have a very nice niche here in the peninsula we lovingly call Cape Cod, right? Is it niche or niche, by the way? I don't know.
Niche.
Well, it depends. If you're French, it's niche.
Niche.
Well, he must be French.
Très bien, monsieur.
Yeah.
But you feel you've got something that you can defend, is what you told
Right.
us.
We do, and the wonderful thing about Cape Cod, there are many wonderful things, but in terms of a business, especially a regional business such as ours, is Cape Cod hangs together as a region, a true region.
Right.
Papers our size, most papers our size around the country, they don't have the lines that you can draw around their readership area like we can. We're bound by water, we're bound by the canal and the bridges. And so you can clearly define what Cape Cod is, and we all do, and we all identify with what Cape Cod means. If you are in, say, the Metro West region, the area outside of Framingham,
Right.
well, where does Metro West begin and where does it end? We know it includes Framingham at its hub, but where else is the Metro West, and who identifies themselves as being part of Metro West? I'm not sure the people in Wellesley do. I'm not sure the people in Weston do.
Maybe some of them do.
Maybe they do.
But they don't know.
And that's a challenge for them. Even a paper our size faces an identity crisis. For us, we have this great region that is Cape Cod, and our idea is to cover it on a daily basis, better than anyone. And oh, by the way, let's evolve our business model and strike a balance between delivering information in a different way.
One thing I wanted to ask you, I mentioned at the outset that as far as I'm as a reader, that you make it a point to report on business. Speaking of which, whether it's on an existing, business or new startups, you cover them. That's on purpose. I mean, you're not doing that inadvertently, I wouldn't think. So
no, it's vital to us, and we believe deeply in the community aspect of Cape Cod being reliant upon a strong and healthy business base.
Right.
And I think the two of you have rightly pointed out that the key to survival here is to have small businesses, entrepreneurial in nature, innovative in nature. They can stretch their business beyond the boundaries of Cape Cod, but if they bring their hub here, they're going to do very well, and so will the Cape. We need jobs. We need sustainable revenue streams that go well beyond the service economy, because as much as that's important, ask anyone who's in it, it's a feast or famine, and you two know better than I do.
Right. Well, that's basically the whole premise of this show, to talk continuously about creating businesses right here in southeastern Massachusetts, and in this particular case, Cape Cod, that can pay a decent wage, and then we don't have an affordable housing problem. It's an affordable housing problem because, if you can't afford a $200,000 house if you're only making $8 an hour. So. Well, Paul, thank you so much. As always, we run out of time before we even begin. We'll have to have you back on the show to continue this conversation.
Well, I'd love to do that.
I appreciate your coming, and it was good to see you. And
thank you,
thank you
Cliff.
so much
very
for
good
being
to
on
see
the
you.
show.
thank you, Paul.
Bill, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on this episode. Hope you've enjoyed listening to Paul, and as Coach said, we need to get him back.
Absolutely. We just got started. As we were chatting, I'm making more notes, so I don't have time to ask him the questions.
Thank you for watching, and you can always send us your commentary to foxrobbins@gmail.com, and you can also watch past episodes of the Fox Robbins Business Show on capemedia.org, which is the website for this media center. And I thank you. Thanks to our director, David Major, our assistant director, Mary Alexander, and we will see you guys next time.